Hi everyone, I'm here to share some ideas on Cuorens and try to answer this notion of is our happiness evolving? So, first of all, let's start with this notion of evolution. I'm a big fan of Darwin, so I always like to embed this evolutionary notion in the ideas that I explore and present. So, let's have this as a backdrop. And from just a creative perspective, I think we can all agree that with the appearance of Homo sapiens, we did develop our thinking, rational capacity, our creative capacity. And just as a clear example of what we achieved through that is putting a man on the moon. I'm a big space fan, so I always see this as a clear example of all the technological breakthroughs that are behind this incredible achievement. Um, but as much as I think this showcases how much we've evolved, when I look around and I think we all can somehow relate to this, we still see much despair, much stress, anxiety, and that contrast of like our incredible technological achievements with this still psychological and just like even social angst. I think it begs the question, like, to what extent have we evolved? And it could very well be the case, like using this meme is like we just could be messing things up, and for all that our creative capacity has enabled us, we've immerse ourselves more and more in a very stressful yeah, just climate in general. So although we have this kind of big question just looming above our heads, I want to present a more optimistic perspective, and again from an evolutionary viewpoint. In the same way that if we look back, we have our physical origin, and give or take 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared. I invite us to consider that there is a new self emerging, and I play with the idea of calling it Homo quotens or just quotens from the Latin word quote for heart. And I'll go into why the heart in a second as a reference point. Although I think many people already would resonate with the value and the importance of having ourselves be more centered around the heart. And just also as preliminary notions, I would say that Cuorens is our beingness that somehow is more attuned and can feel more the world from a vibrational or an energetic perspective, just to lay those notions in a very just general way. Having said that, it's not that I'm saying that Quorens is necessarily our or is represented by the enlightened master or those that go profound into meditation, or although I think there's definitely value and there is a relationship between us being able to go into that depth, that inner depth. But that is just one reference. um, I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I also would like to say that Quorens could be associated with like those enlightened beings like Yoda, and us feeling the Force around us. And although there are elements of that as well that I think are within Quorens, I don't want to have that be the representation. I would rather connect Quorens with a much more day to day perspective. And this has to do with our inner happiness. And I'd like to illustrate this by a personal experience I had probably 15 to 20 years ago when I traveled to India with some friends. And as part of our journey, we stopped in Calcutta at a house that was helping people that were very sick. So we just stayed there as volunteers for a couple of days. And it was this one day when we got to the roof of the house. just to hang out and dry out some blankets. And from the roof, we saw down there at one of the corners this man that was completely doubled down. Like he seemed to be just barely getting by. But the resident volunteer that was leading our efforts called this man's name from up there, and this man just from that like really um, just bent down position, he lifted his head and he smiled in a way that for me was just like, where did this come from? Where did this radiance, where did this joy come from? And that to me somehow just ignited in me just this knowingness that there is a happiness that goes way beyond the material possessions. Because clearly, this man had no material belongings whatsoever, and still he had this like very clear, just beautiful smile and a very clear joy. So that got me started on like there's something else that we're missing in our typical day-to-day material kind of pursuits. So I would say that Cuorens is well connected to that inner happiness. And I play around representing our different selves by these sort of like illustrations, cartoons that we'll get into just a little bit later. But just to introduce already Cuorens with his heart centeredness. But although I want to share this optimistic outlook on Cuorens, again, I think we do need to recognize that our thinking minds have led us into almost what I would say is a negativity of 24/7. We have constant thoughts, and the vast majority of these thoughts are negative. And again, from an evolutionary perspective, it sort of makes sense because back in the day when we had to survive, it paid off to be thinking more about the tigers that could eat us and not as much on the rainbows out there. So at that time, it made sense. The problem is that right now, there aren't that many tigers out there. And I would say that most of our negative thoughts have to do with our egos and our worry that people are going to be judging us. So, but that has like extrapolated in so many negative thoughts that I think it clearly is not healthy, but I think there's an opportunity to address that if we have a little bit more clarity on who we are, how we're evolving, and some choices that we can make. And speaking of choices, I'd like to share with you like two very clear choices that I think uh, themselves to us in a more clear way when we consider the Cuorens perspective. So the first choice is our attitude. And the way I introduce choosing our attitude is, again, from an evolution perspective, is considering that sapiens was the first like emergence that presented us with a very clear choice, which was over our physical instincts. So before sapiens, we just had to follow our instinct and everything was pretty automatic. However, when sapiens emerged and was able to see things happening and connect cause and effect, sapiens can really choose the action that he or she wants to take, and not feel like completely dominated by instincts. As a personal example, I might feel very inclined to eat chocolate because that's kind of like ingrained in myself, and I really enjoy it. But sapiens can see that inclination, but can still choose and say, yeah, perhaps a bar of chocolate is fine, but if I eat too much, it will be unhealthy. So again, like it's that ability to see and choose. In the case of sapiens over physical, it's just about those actions. When it comes to Cuorens over sapiens, it has more to do about like those thoughts that sapiens continually ruminate around, like the ones that we were referring to when we were discussing the negativity. So Cuorens can see those thoughts, and for a second we typically think that those thoughts are automatic and it's just what they are. Like if someone insults me, I mean, obviously I need to insult that person back. So that there doesn't seem to be a question around that, or we tell ourselves that. But from the perspective of Cuorens, yes, insulting back is a very clear option, and perhaps it could be the right one, but there are other options. So the opportunity that Cuorens provides us is to understand what's going on, understand all our thoughts that are being fired, but also recognizing that when we see those alternative thoughts, we can actually choose which of the thought or the attitude that is more healthy for any given situation. So again, just as a more of a framework of Quorens being able to choose the attitude that Sapiens entertains at different situations. And just to illustrate that a little bit more, before going into some examples, I'll just share this notion of breathing with the heart, because from that place we can create the gap, or where we can more clearly see the thoughts that we have at play. And now going into examples, just again with these illustrations, typically we go and complain about just about everything. In this case, it's like in a beautiful scenery, Sapiens is complaining about the thorns in the rose. While if we connected with our heart and we could see that yes, the thorns are there, but we could choose to be more grateful for all the beauty that surrounds us. In the same light, when we relate to others, we can very easily fall into criticizing uh, those around us. In this case, criticizing this little boy for not being able to reach the apple, and just like noting all his shortcomings. Or we could connect with our heart and actually see that that person, though short and can't jump to pick up the apple, is pretty strong and can actually shake the tree for the apple to fall. So Quorens would see that and encourage that person, celebrate the strengths of that person instead of just criticizing. And the final example is like, yes, we typically worry about all that could go wrong, and there's some value in anticipating and planning for things that could go wrong. But again, we tend to just do that, just worry. And we could balance that with more optimism and see, acknowledge things that, like the lightnings that, or the storm that could come our way. But we can also see that there are suns out there that are just about to rise. So just balancing our worry inclination with some optimism. And finally, just to share like another choice, which has to do more with connect, and it might seem a little bit vague at this point, but I still like to just seed some notions of what I mean by connecting. And I try to divide the opportunities in three. First is connecting with everything that's around us, with all the energy that comes from nature, which is pretty clear, but just about anything we can see magic in very small and mundane moments. So being open to that connection, then connecting with others and feeling the joy of that connection. We'll go a little bit more into this in a second. And finally, connecting with this information or this guidance that's out there that we quite commonly call intuition, but we don't connect to that as much. So I think there's an opportunity. And again, if we center ourselves with the heart, that we can connect more with that intuition. And the image there tries to represent that if before connecting with our intuition, we were probably using our oars to drive our boat. But if we connect with our intuition, we can see the winds, the tides, the currents, and navigate our boat in a much more fluid way. And now, if we go into this opportunity of connection, which has to do with a loving intent, which is connecting with others. Excuse me for trying to make myself less visible. When we connect with others, from a heart perspective, from a vibratory perspective, the invitation is for us to see that even without the action, or without the communication, even if we just have the intention of helping others, just sending those good intentions to others, and even if they are not aware of that, there's something that happens that we already feel good about that. There's kind of like an immediate connection of us acting or having the intent of the others being happy, and not just being worried about our own happiness, that comes back to us immediately. And that's why I call it the loving intent, and how that comes back to us like it's a wave that comes back, rebounds in the other, and comes back to us. So it's a little bit vague, but just for you to have that notion. And perhaps the way of seeing it a little bit more clearly is by the typical acts of kindness. Um, in the same way that we were looking before at that person that was very much in material need, although he had a clear spiritual joy. Um, you may have faced, I've had some occasions where I've been able to help others, and clearly the intent was to see the others be happy as a result of our actions, being it like offering them food or offering them support in different ways. But what I've always find surprising is like just how much happiness one feels for that act of giving. I hear again and again of like people being so surprised and so satisfied and so overjoyed by just them being the ones that help, but them feeling that clear joy. So that for me is just a very day-to-day example of like that connection and that loving intent. So having shared like the value of quadrants emerging and the choices that we can make, I still want to remind ourselves that we are an integration of those three selves. It's not that I'm saying that we should all move from sapiens to quadrants. It's just that like just trying to raise awareness of that opportunity is there for us to expand into quadrants, but acknowledging and like celebrating that we are an integration of those three selves. And with that, and again like reinforcing these opportunities that we have, these two choices of choosing our attitudes when we are heart-centered, or choosing to connect more in different ways, but more than anything with others through loving intent. I would say that we're doing okay. So let's be reassured by that. Let's welcome these opportunities, and I hope each of you can start finding and connecting a little bit more with your own version of quadrants.